Hello, everyone. Welcome to the second day of Cultural Examination, a series of panels and performances with 19 different cultural practitioners. We thank the British Council for being in partnership with us along with the Momentum program to make this happen. Our first panel for the day will be our Literature and Publications panel, and it will be moderated by Rima Rantisi. She teaches literature in the Department of English at the American University of Beirut and is the founding editor of Rusted Radishes, a Beirut literary and art journal. Her essays can be found in the New England Review, Literary Hub, Assay, a journal of nonfiction studies, Sweet, a literary confection, Past 10, and Slag Glass City. She holds an MFA in creative nonfiction from the Vermont College of Fine Arts. Please put your hands together for our moderator for the evening.
Hello. Check. Hello, hello, hello. Okay, welcome to this panel in which we will discuss local literary knowledge production with Lisa Luxx, Haig Ayvazian, and Sarah Huneidi. Today we ask questions revolving around publishing and literary practices in Lebanon and regionally in contexts rife with instability. How do we experiment and make choices in these contexts and to what end? What gaps are we interested in filling? And in what ways are we producing literary knowledge today? Here we are in a context in which Lira has hit almost indiscernibly today an all-time low. Gas station lines are back, and our Chief Justice released all the detained suspects in the port explosion. This is just another day in the life. What does this mean for literary production? How do we do it locally? The first person I want to introduce is Haig. He's a former artistic director at the Beirut Art Center and the founding editor at The Derivative, which was established in October 2020 in the wake of seismic shifts in our society. This publication is an attempt at building collective vocabularies, registers, and practices that address and confront the systemic onslaught facing the everyday. Every issue of The Derivative starts with 3 guest editors, each assigned a theme in the form of a 3-letter root word in Arabic. Each editor then collaborates with 5 contributors to help unfold the various facets of each theme, as well as an artistic contribution responding to each text. The Derivative is publishing some of the most exciting contemporary writers from the region. Please welcome Haig. In 2018, Sarah Huneidi co-founded independent publishing house Barakunan, where she acts as managing editor and producer. In 2022, she co-founded Shatr, a collective aimed at galvanizing poetry in Lebanon through performances and workshops. These collectives allow her to activate her enthusiasm for literature in kinetic formats. She lives in Beirut, where she works as a freelance editor and experiments with audiovisual mediums. Barakunan is on the cutting edge of publishing as it works in various media formats, including performances, videos, audio, podcasts, and audiobooks. It produces full-length print publications by both established and emerging authors. Similarly, Shatr puts on poetry performances with multimedia aspects. Please welcome Sarah. Lisa Luxx is a poet, activist, playwright, and essayist, widely published in anthologies and journals including Penguin Books and the New England Review. A short film was produced for her popular poem Lesbian, which was broadcast on national TV in the UK throughout 2020. It went on to win Best LGBTQ Short at Independent Short Awards, among 5 other awards. Her poems are regularly broadcast on BBC Radio 4. In 2021, she published her debut poetry collection, Fetch Your Mother's Heart, and which Poetry Review wrote that it is vigorously intellectual and politically febrile. She is currently working on a short story collection, 2 new plays, and a memoir about displacement. She guest lectures at universities in the UK and the US on revolutionary poetics. As anyone who has seen Lisa perform, sorry, we're going to call her Luxx. As anyone who has seen Luxx perform her poetry, she leaves her audiences rapt, sometimes stunned. Not only by her presence, but by the way she weaves heavy themes, including adoption and displacement and identity and dreams, often told with political overtones, always with fresh, memorable language. Please welcome Luxx. Okay, so we have a number of questions that we'd like to answer and things we want to discuss, and we're going to do as much as we can here. So to the panelists, all of you guys do things differently and out of the box. How do you push, bend, or break the rules in your practice? And this question is for all of you. Luxx, you want to start?
Sure thing. So, first of all, my question would be what rules? Because I particularly think that this craft, and I'm talking about literature, not specifically publishing, because there is a difference in my answer to those two things, but in literature, it is the rebel's art form, specifically poetry. Yeah, it constantly pushes against standardized language and therefore the grammatology of society, because language is the basis of the grammatology of how we move through a policed world, right? And so poetry is very distinct in the way that it pushes back at that and it interrupts that. When I used to go into schools and teach, I would ask, let me be with the students who are at the bottom of their class in literature and writing and English, because I want to tell them that actually poetry belongs to them. It's theirs. It is for disrupting. And if the grammatology that is standardized doesn't work for you, then a poet is born, you know. So I think that it also comes from a practice of queering as well. And I think that to queer, and the way that we created a verb from queer, which means to approach world slant, if you like, is to just tip the grammatology of society on its side. And I believe that that's what my practice does, but it does so alongside the way that I move through society as well.
Hi.
Yeah, I'm not sure if we do bend the rules. The closest thing I would say is like a certain kind of systematic openness to different forms of writing. So to not sort of say, you know, the best equipped language is, let's say, academic language or poetry or whatever the form may be, but rather a kind of accumulation of different modes of writing to hopefully come at both in terms of editorial practices, but also as a way to account for the world that comes at those practices from multiple directions or perspectives.
But the derivative has an interesting editorial model in that they have a guest editor each time reaching out to 5 different writers. So it is solicited. It also is that, you know, there's a kind of a broad editorial board in some way, not necessarily the same gatekeepers, if you will. You know, we can call ourselves gatekeepers somehow, but, you know, in a good way. And so, you know, that I find to be something, you know, that we can emulate more in terms of, you know, just not just having one editorial line or one editorial perspective.
Yeah, I think, I mean, there's several things that does, as far as I'm concerned. One is to, I mean, it's funny. There's like some things are very restrictive about the format. So, you know, you get these 3 letters, you get these 5 people. It's a kind of supposed to be a weekly or bi-weekly sort of rotation of text, etc. On the one hand, and then on the other hand, there's a kind of openness of you know, giving control to these guest editors who then give control to the writers. And the other thing I think that I find productive or generative about this is that you just get to meet people that you may not have otherwise come to, or you come across practices that may not be on your radar or might not be your cup of tea, so to speak. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's a way to sort of enlarge the circles, hopefully of allies and colleagues.
Mm-hmm. And Sarah, you're pushing boundaries in terms of form.
Yes. So I have several things to say about this. First, as a publishing house, as a publisher with Barakunan, I think you have to know the rules to be breaking them. I mean, I don't think you're really breaking the rules if you don't know how publishing works at a mainstream level. And we learned that the hard way because we went in just assuming that it was going to work to break all the rules. But mainstream publishing, I mean, particularly, I guess, Western mainstream publishing, which is the audience you want to reach, because we're writing in English, personally. I feel like they have very rigid ways of doing things, both from writers to publishers. You need an agent. It's very difficult to reach agents usually as well. And then the publishing schedule also. There's certain good times for publishing and there's certain bad times for publishing. So I mean, we basically broke all the rules because we didn't break into the Western market anyway. So we were like, well, as long as we're not it's so hard to get into there, then we might as well, kind of do it our way, which is just a slow learning process. We don't have a way yet. We're still learning. I think also in terms of form, and also I guess it was a publishing decision as well, Barakunan started as a writing project, a co-writing collective kind of. And the first thing we did was self-publish. So we released work, but then we also called it a publishing house because we had the intention of publishing, and we are publishing others. We also, in terms of Shatr as well, we kind of bring literature off the page, which I think sometimes poetry or even fiction or any kind of writing, it has, it's like, it kind of stays on its high horse, which is the page, and I think experimenting, taking it off the page through installations or through interventions, performances, I think that might be a way of also bending the rules. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So I was curious, what have been some of your influences for your art, either locally or internationally, for the work that you're doing? Lisa? Luxx, sorry.
That's all right. It takes a minute. I'm all right. Influences. Well, of course, it changes. It changes every project or so. But right now, I'm trying to figure out what a practical poem is. So, with the world in times of crisis, how can poetry be practical and not superfluous and not on high horses? And my question is, as we know here, I think anybody who's kind of been involved in anything like on street level in the past few years, like everybody needs a bag of rice, everybody needs a sack of rice. There's a lot of delivery in 2020 of like sacks of rice. I don't know. This is something that I saw a lot of and was involved in a lot of, and I started to wonder, how can the poem be like rice? So I guess rice was influence number one in this thinking. Actually, Matluba, I was like sitting there with no poem that was appropriate and eating and thinking, the rice is more appropriate than the poetry. How can they actually belong in the same space as part of the daily compass of life, and part of the material fabric of life? And so I'm looking to June Jordan a lot at the moment because she wrote rice poetry. She wrote in the everyday speech somehow. She wrote in AAVE, which is African American Vernacular English. So again, going back to what I was saying before, she pushed against the standardization of English. And she also wrote poems as well that were very distinctly to crises outside of her own. And I think that this is something we're so careful about doing now, understandably. But also she did it so sensitively, and like she wrote to Lebanon, you know, she was a African-American poet and she was writing to Lebanon, you know, like this, to me, this means something, actually. When I'm sitting on my terrace and I see June Jordan 50 years ago was writing out this way, this means something, actually. So I'm interested in her and her ethos in that way. And then again, because of me mentioning the standardization of English and poetics, decolonial value in that somehow. Aimé Césaire, who was a Martinique poet and politician, who, when he moved from Martinique to Paris to study, he got involved in the Surrealist movement because he wanted to break the chokehold that French had on him. And his way of doing that was through Surrealist writing. He then went on to realize there was a decolonial limit in Surrealism, so he started the Negritude movement. And then we have, in more contemporary times, like Marwa Halal, who created the form, the Arabic. So it's in her footnote of the first time she created this form, you know, the Marwa Halal, the Arabic. Yeah. So she created this form where the idea is she was constantly considered, lesser when she was in America for having English as second language, right? So,
what is she considered?
Lesser.
Lesser, okay.
Yeah, I don't know if it's a word, but it's a word?
Yeah.
Yeah, the way you looked at me, I doubted my entire life here. I was about to put the mic down and go. So she created this form that it reads from right to left. But in English. So the idea is to vehemently, as she says it, vehemently reject the English as only speaker, right? And then she includes like an Arabic letter and stuff like this. So this is this progressive decolonial poetics that I'm super interested in as well.
Influences. I mean, I can say, I guess it's more of an inspiration than an influence, perhaps. For Barakunan, it was always Beit al-Hikmah, the House of Wisdom in Baghdad, in Abbasid, Baghdad. It was a center for academics and intellectuals, but also for science, and they would translate texts from all over the world and disseminate them, and also create anthologies of different poets and different philosophers. So they were pretty awesome. And we wanted to create that kind of, I guess, kind of like an axis mundi, if that makes sense, like a place where ideas are sort of not only, I mean, it's not just books you're creating, but it's ideas, and so that's a dream, you know, that's a vision and an inspiration. I think for Shatr, a lot of it's also an inspiration rather than an influence, but I think it's the city itself just makes poetry feel a little more necessary. Or I don't know if it's the city or the country or the times that we live in or whatever is happening now. I think, like Luxx said, there's something sort of just immediately rebellious about poetry, either because it's radical or because it in itself can kind of be seen as even cheesy, you know. So it's a place to be sentimental or be vulnerable. It makes it kind of okay to be that way. Poetry does. So I think that we were kind of compelled to create somewhere where we could, you know, be emotional, I guess. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, like I have a few sort of references, three. One is this journal or magazine called Cabinet, out of New York, which every issue is based on a element or object. The only one I can remember right now is like dust, for example. So, you know, like very sort of detail-oriented things that the whole issue then kind of goes into unpacking. And then there's a website which is still up but has stopped publishing, which I actually discovered after we started the derivative, but which I love, called Real Life Mag. And it's a series of articles on technology, very broadly speaking. And I forget, they have like several rubrics of, you know, so it's technology, but then it's like, the one that I sort of go to the most is this section on just everyday objects. So I don't know, it can be like a hairdryer or a mixer or something like this. So how these like very common objects can be looked at anew. Yeah, and then in terms of just like generally inspiration or a necessity, it was, I mean, I guess Beirut, not in the kind of cheesy, beautiful way, but the opposite, like the infuriatingly sort of suffocating way of feeling a real need for two things. One is to come together. I mean, it started the derivative was launched during COVID, so this need of coming together, you know, if not physically, then at least kind of mentally. And the other was to, you know, this real feeling of like a crisis in language to kind of talk about, you know, the stuff that you were enumerating in the introduction. Like, what does it mean to kind of reiterate this information? Like, you know, the exchange rate is this much, benzene is this much, this thing has been destroyed, this is no longer, etc. Like, what do these facts actually produce, and do they make the actual reality felt? Are they able to kind of mobilize a real kind of response? And so, you know, the intention or the ambition or the goal is to fuck around with language and thought to sort of come up with something, even if it's kind of Frankensteinian and sort of, you know, patchwork, to at least kind of do that work to try and get somewhere, to break through to some other sort of, mode.
Okay, thank you. So your projects, especially Haig and Sarah, are collaboration-based. So how do you approach collaboration? What are the possibilities when setting out on co-writing or co-producing? What does that mean for you? You know, rather than a solitary act, you know, you're all doing something that is bringing people together, that is bringing collectives together, bringing ideas together. You know, what's your interest there, and what's your approach?
All the writing I've done, or all the literature work that I've done recently, has been incredibly collaborative. So, as opposed to sort of the stereotypical, you know, lone writer, and it's been a really rewarding experience actually. Co-writing itself was almost magical, actually. Once you sort of really get into it, we created entire worlds. I mean, we started Barakunan sort of on that premise. We had been working, co-writing. The two other co-founders and I had been co-writing kind of by accident through emails for years, and we created like a sort of alternative Beirut, a fictional kind of mirror image of Beirut, or house of mirror images of Beirut, and it kind of grew from there. But you really start to form your own language and your own sort of mythology once you start co-writing with people, and I think that was a really incredible experience. It eventually got real because co-writing also just means that you spend a lot of time sitting, especially when we were all in the same country. It just meant that we were sitting around talking for hours and not actually, not actually working, not actually sort of building a publishing house. We were just having sort of too much fun writing. So eventually we just had literally actually hundreds of thousands of pages and nothing else, So eventually we kind of had to stop and work with all of the pages that we had. So we did kind of sift through or sieve through the pages and reconstruct smaller and smaller worlds until we had more solid narratives. And for Shatr, it's a different kind of collaboration because we're often collaborating with other kinds of artists. So there's the poets, and then we work with audio, with sound, with musicians, with video people. So that collaboration also, I think, those kinds of collaborations, I think they, rather than taking away from the poetry, I think they help build worlds also around poems and also help retain people's attention as well in different ways.
Tell us a little bit more about the fictionalizing aspect that plays a huge role in what you guys do.
Yes, I'm going to try. I'm going to try and make it simple. So we co-write and then publish under a pen name of Zahreddin. And the author, Zahreddin, is also a character in these worlds. So the books that we've published, they come from the same kind of fictional universe, but they're not directly related. So they're different, although they have some of the same. Well, they have Zahreddin in common, and Zahreddin is kind of a future past poet, pilgrim, prophet character. And you can kind of, it's fun for us, and it's also it's a tool to be able to talk about, to speculate about the region, to make up histories, to explore alternative histories and futures. Also, we're able to, put a fiction book in an art gallery, sort of because it has this concept. So a lot of our sales points in Europe and the couple that we have in the States, they're basically art bookstores. And we also bring those. I don't know if that answers your question, or if anybody understood any of that. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So publishing under Zahreddin is always fun, and so this character of Zahreddin is meant to be the founder and leader of an also fictional resistance movement. It's called Bara, and they are the Narrative Liberation Front, is what we call them. Yes. I'm not. I can go on for hours, but I'm not going to. Yeah, we can talk later.
Does he have character traits, certain temperaments that?
Absolutely. He has entire histories and entire stories, and he turned into a butterfly. They say he turned into a butterfly. They say. It is said. The last sighting of Zahreddin. And this is a true story.
You look at me to say something.
Yeah, I can move on, or you. If you
No, I can say something. But first, I want to say creating myth through co-writing. I wrote this. I keep writing down everything you're saying. It's really good. Oh. Creating myth through co-writing is really beautiful. I kind of touched upon what I'd say about collaboration a bit as well. I think for me, collaboration is very intuitive. And there's a difference between a commission where you feel like you're put with someone who you work with, and a collaboration that feels like you are both willing to enter two completely submerge yourself in a particular layer of madness. You know, like if I want to orient myself around whether is this a collaboration, like true collaboration, or is this a commission? I guess I wonder, would I be comfortable when the salt leaves my body with this person? You know, when I sweat or when I cry, could I do that beside this person? If so, yeah, it's a collaboration. If not, it's a commission. It's a job. You know, it's not going to change the shape of my soul somehow. So yeah, I think it's very intuitive for me in that way.
Maybe I can say a couple of things also, if that's okay. Just about collaboration and collectivity. I mean, I just find both these kind of notions slippery. Like from an art world perspective, it's like this super fetishized thing. You know, collectives and collaboration. And then on the other hand, also in practice, and yeah, as far as my own experience in the last 3-4 years, I can say specifically here, it's also like this kind of super difficult thing. So I don't know. On the one end, I feel like I'm not generalizing the we. It's like my own we. We sort of keep falling back on these instinctive individuality, right? It's like collaborations, unless they're very clearly defined, and you know, there's like continuous effort to maintain it. It always wants to crumble somehow. And on the other hand, from the kind of fetishistic art world, where you know it's kind of celebrated, it becomes a theme, etc. But in fact, it's like the most common thing. Like we're constantly doing it. Everything is collaboration. If you put together an exhibition, you know, it's like it involves at least two components: the space and the artist or artists. But then also people who put together the exhibition, you know, art handlers. Like it's actually an operation, and there's just some weird distinction that happens between like this kind of distribution of labor and collaboration. But also even just as individual practice of writing or of art making or of filmmaking, I don't know, I always show stuff to people that I trust or friends to get some feedback. Yeah. That's like a collaborative process. Right. I wanted to say one other thing, but it just... Right. And then also... I guess between the two, I don't know. I have now, lost maybe 80 or 90% of my circle that used to be here that is now elsewhere. I would say 80 or 90% of that 80 or 90% is probably in Berlin. So I just constantly hear from fucking friends in Berlin who are just like involved in these reading groups that they do for like months on end, go through books, and it makes me jealous as hell. And so it's also like, you know, I've never had I've tried a couple of reading groups here, and it's a struggle. It's a struggle in terms of like rigor. It's a struggle in terms of like maintaining the kind of desire to do close readings of things. Like there's just, So again, I don't know, between these three kind of things, it's like this elusive thing that manifests but then dissipates.
Yeah, because like days like this, I feel like everything's gonna crumble. You know, like things are like, okay, we're not gonna have the panel. We're not gonna, we're not gonna publish. We're not gonna. So there's that constant, feeling of crumbling, and also the internal kind of relief that it might crumble. That like, okay, actually, I won't have to do anything, and that was fun for a while. And now I feel like we're doing stuff again. So there is that, but also I feel that I think all of us on stage here would do collaborative things, and probably many of you do too. It's interesting to think about what you're saying, Haig, about that, everything we're doing is collaborative, but then we're kind of romanticizing it as more collaborative or collective than it needs to be promoted. But sometimes I wonder if, because of the gaps that we have, where everyone's in Berlin or everyone's in New York, those collectives keep us a bit safer, and we are actually doing work. We're all artists of some form here, of writers, visual artists, etc. which we could be doing very happily on our own, and instead of doing this very rigorous, difficult work of bringing people together and publishing other people's work and bringing that to the light versus doing our own, or putting that to the side. So there's something that I always question myself. Why do I do that? And there's something that I enjoy about it and that is exciting, but also there's a question of, are we kind of taking that on to fill in some sort of gap? So that's kind of my next question to you. And what gaps do you still think that, what do you think we can do in Beirut to advance our literary production? We have an issue of distribution, and we can kind of fold these two questions together. Distribution is really tough in the Arab world, and especially today in Lebanon, going into publishing is like not that smart, in terms of financially, so it's really tough unless you're getting grants and all of that, because as a profit-making endeavor, it's not going to be something that's going to, be sustainable. So my question is, twofold in terms of, how can we advance? What do we need to do more, perhaps, or what needs to happen? Maybe not us or someone out there can do in terms of literary production, or what are we doing toward advancing it? And at the same time, because distribution is essential to that, how do we decide on how we distribute? And I noticed that I don't think the derivative has a social media presence, correct?
Not separate from that of the space.
The website?
Of the Beirut Art Center.
Oh, okay. So I was just wondering what you guys think about, like, in terms of distribution beyond social media, in terms of promotion, or any kind of other ways that we can, how to engage our audiences. Do you want to start, Luxx?
Sure. Yeah. Well, one thing that came to mind with what you were just saying was, there was a time pre-publishing where literature still existed. And there'll be a time beyond publishing when literature still exists, because it exists over coffee in the morning. It exists in the way that we talk to each other. It exists on our text messages, actually. You were just saying about the emails exchange, and in the performance you did last night, you had text exchanges and things. It exists. It is a part of the way that we speak to each other. There's rhythm and timbre in the way that we speak to each other. And so I wonder if it's returning a lot more to putting value on oral literature, and I think part of that comes with being generous with your art as well. Like, I've been thinking a lot lately about the idea of being prolific or being perfectionist, and I don't think that I've decided there is no one better way. You've got your Ilya Kaminskys, who will take 20 years to write his next poetry collection, and it will be impeccable, or you've got like Nawal El-Sadawi, who just threw books out, alongside or everything else she was doing. Neither is right or wrong, but there's a generosity in letting go, I think, a little bit. And when you are working in the oral form, because I've been doing a lot more theatre these days, like writing a lot more scripts and what have you, and of course that means full production, but also it's thinking like, what can be boiled down to having one person perform it, one person just say it. Because as long as you have that one person to say it, then you reduce a lot of costs. Just need a good outfit.
Yeah, I think there's also, print is very different than anything else. I also believe in generosity, so I also believe in, I don't mean just like giving things for free, but just being super prolific and just putting things out all the time. Barakunan was part of an exhibition here, actually, at the Beirut Art Center called How to Reappear, Between the Quivering Leaves of Independent Publishing. And it was put together by Kay Fatah, which is another publisher in, I guess, one of the founders is from Egypt, the other is from Amman. And they addressed this in their exhibition, which also traveled. It wasn't just here. They did it in Abu Dhabi as well, and in Jordan, perhaps some other places too. And they addressed the challenges of distribution, of publishing in general, but they focused a lot on distribution in the Middle East. And I mean, they didn't come up with there's no answer. There's right. No, but I think a lot of publishers and writers, all kinds of. It wasn't just book publishers actually that find this problem. There's a general distribution problem. Mm-hmm. So I think music has the same issue. Yeah. So they were thinking of kind of. There was talk of mimicking the sort of oligarchical distribution systems in other parts of the world, because really in the UK and in the States at least, they're like, I don't know, they're fortresses, the publishing and distribution pipelines. They're really difficult to crack. So I think what they were saying, there was a general consensus that creating an independent, because there are distribution avenues, it's just that they're a little bit more mainstream, and I guess in the region they're more for Arabic writing, I imagine. So there was talk of creating this hub, a kind of like a marketplace, where you have just this one place that has connections with distributors in other parts of the world. We had this, there was, I actually forget her name, which is kind of, which is bad, but there was a woman from Hong Kong that we spoke to, who was part of the exhibition in, maybe it was in Amman, and she said that they have the same, I mean, in the Far East, they have the same sort of issue where they have all these little publishers, independent publishers or cultural institutions that want to publish things, and their reach just kind of stops, as ours does. I mean, there's social media, but social media, I don't know if it can only go so far, but it's a drag to have to do social media all the time.
Yes, it is. Sure is.
Yeah. Yeah, so maybe some kind of distribution hub could be a good idea if anybody wants to do it.
I mean, I do think like that. I think a distribution hub sounds really great. Mm-hmm. I'm just convinced, I think, that, I don't know. I mean, I think about radio in relation to sort of reach. Maybe I don't think about distribution so much, but reach, let's say. Mm-hmm. And, again, kind of COVID times, the radio communities that sort of popped up, and the sort of, the dynamism around those initiatives. And I think they come from a couple of different things. Again, it's like forming and kind of growing a community around sustained practice and interests. So it's not just like a dormant thing. It's like activated constantly by the very thing, the very object that sort of brings people together. And I think ultimately when you have this kind of dynamic group that essentially is kind of forming a huddle and has its back turned to whatever those mechanisms may be, but they're just kind of really invested in figuring something out with a project, be it a book, a publication, or I think there's a kind of magnetism to that people sort of come to that and are interested in what's being done or attempted. I think that's one way of broadening reach, not sort of across the board or not arbitrarily. Like it's a kind of directed and intentful thing. There's like specific people that will come for specific reasons to take part in this thing. Yeah, because the social media stuff, I mean, we talked about this briefly when we were chatting. Like, I just also find it super misleading. So, whatever engagement you may get out of a post about an article, let's say, those metrics don't necessarily reflect the actual engagement. Yeah. or or how long they spent on the article, even if they actually kind of got to it. So I think it just adds a lot of misleading sort of data to.
Yeah, that's true.
Not to say that it's not a useful tool. I'm not saying like, yeah.
Yeah, definitely social media helped us and the internet helped us reach further because, we started off really small. But if I look at the analytics, and we've been able to reach serious writers and artists and such, but as rusted radishes. But when I look at the analytics, it's funny because it'll say like average 2 minutes on your site, and it's like, well, it takes about, at least 20 minutes to read a piece. So I'm pretty sure most people didn't read it. So what are they doing is the question. Like, what are they doing in there? So they're going in, they're checking out, maybe they're just checking out the images.
They're printing.
They're printing. I sure hope so. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what's going on. We really don't know much about distribution. Let's just put it that way. We do know some things, but there is definitely a huge gap. There is a new organization, collective, whatever you want to call it, called Kutubli. And I don't know if I don't think that they're here, but, they're two young people who are actually just, starting to get it off the ground. And they're reaching out to all kinds of authors and publishers and trying to make it a hub for people to reach. And when I was talking to them, I'm like, oh, whoa, like this could turn into, the next Amazon, of the Middle East. And they're like, oh, leave me alone. We have like this much of a grant and this is what we're doing right now. So it's going to be a web space, but I mean, those things can grow maybe suddenly, who knows. But that is definitely something that we need to think about specifically in print where, good for you and hats off to you, Anjad, لأنه it's very difficult to like put your effort in that and distribute those and hope for somebody to buy them. So yeah.
I think the way we did it with Barakunan was really just like cold reaching, writing bookstores, doing research on bookstores and just writing them personally. And I mean, generally, they weren't very receptive, just because they work with distributors, so they're not accustomed to people. But then there are some sort of more experimental bookstores, or some maybe we did have a distributor at some point in Europe that was really cool for like maybe 6 months, but then they shut down. But our books got into bookstores. They did manage to get our books into some bookstores before they shut down. I think they went bankrupt. Actually, nobody wants to do distribution.
Nobody wants to do it. I know. But that's how we did it too. We would knock on bookstores and on their door. We'd email them, and so many were generous. They're like, yeah, let's try it. But it's not sustainable because you need somebody to travel and you need somebody to drop the books off.
It's not good for your physical health.
Why?
You carry a lot of books.
Yes, I agree.
All the time. Really, I can't bring my books with me.
Yeah.
When I go on a flight now, because I'm my back.
I know. I've moved a lot of suitcases.
Do too many books, carrying them around, feeling like you're peddling them as well.
I know.
Yeah, I've sent them off with people as well, with others as well. Can you take 15 books to Egypt? And nobody wants to bring books into Egypt either.
Absolutely not.
Oh yeah, that too. That's it's a liability. Okay, I think we're running out of time, I believe. We have 10 minutes? Okay. All right, and then we have questions. So I'm going to ask one final question. Yes.
I just want to say, I love that as a kind of, at least as an image. I'm not sure about the kind of practicality of it, but as a kind of stand-in for distribution. I mean, Nadim Shufi, who works here, we discussed this also for the bookstore, and again, going back to the kind of very practical kind of obstacles that, again, the exchange rate, the kind of how expensive shipping is, etc. So Nadim was like, came up with this idea that every time we work with artists, that we could ask them to, choose 2 or 3 of their books, and they can, their own books or books that they're reading that they might, feel is relevant, and just bring them with them. And so that would be one way in which, like, a library or bookstore can accumulate a collection that's, again, sort of directed in this way.
Yeah.
I just think, at least for, I don't know, our sizes, and they vary, but, kind of this range of smallness, I think the idea of kind of, I think we just get kind of caught up with trying to reach a certain scale, and then we end up doing a lot of compromises or like distortions or gymnastics to kind of reach that scale. Whereas I think that, and not to be kind of too simplistic or romantic about it, but I think that there's really something at stake with these kind of smaller, smaller ways of kind of bringing things or smuggling things or exchanging things that is maybe not a stand-in, but equally or if not more potent in this way.
Do you know Ahmed Fuad Nagim, the poet, the Egyptian revolutionary poet, who whenever he was imprisoned, he had to get like his poems somehow out of the prison. So he'd like write the poem on this is if the shit gets bad, yeah? So he'd write his poems on like a cigarette paper and put them inside a tangerine. And then that's the way that tangerine would be like passed on to someone who'd make a song out of it. So his poem would then find its way to the street while he was in jail. I know that's not what you said.
Like, what the hell?
You said smuggling, and I don't know. You said smuggling, man. I ran with it. I don't know.
Okay, this is a final question then. And that's related. So what do you value in publishers and bookshop owners and people who, are distributing and, creating literary knowledge and producing? What do we value in them, and how do we then, kind of use those same practices?
What I value, I'd say, in a publisher, or what I've learned to value in a publisher, has come from, I guess I'm really lucky with the publishers that I've chosen to work with, but it's also because I've been very strict about which publishers I would work with as well.
Strict in what way? What did you...
Strict in, like, my first collection was supposed to come out 5 years ago, but then I found out that the editor had sexual harassment cases held against him. So for sure I pulled out. And then I went on to publish my own things where it was only women or queer folk who were economically benefiting, obviously not greatly, but who were economically benefiting or benefiting in any way from it, on which I called the economy of sisterhood, to protect the work. And then when I went on to obviously sign like book deals and things, I was always very careful about who it was. I'm not looking for, it's like what you were just saying, Haig, as well. Like, I'm not looking for scaling up. I'm not looking for a huge audience. I'm looking for an audience who trusts me. That's the best I can ask for in this brief life, So I was lucky. The book that came out in 2021 was published by Outspoken Press. And 2 examples of why I believe in this press is because, one, I was supposed to be writing it during 2020. Of course, this is the year that it was like post-blast Beirut, and I was supposed to be handing in my manuscript, and it was not possible for me to do that. I did not believe in poetry at that time. And they put all of their resources into hosting, doing fundraisers for different grassroots organizations on the ground in Beirut. They're not in Beirut, they're in England. And then when the book was supposed to be released in May 2021, keep in mind, me and them had been working towards this for a long time. So they'd been putting all their resources into this book and working towards it. And as it got closer, everything was happening in Gaza. And it was not the time to celebrate. For me, it did not feel like a time to draw everyone's attention to a book and say, let's celebrate some poems and stuff. So I told them, I'm sorry, I know you put a lot of effort into the book launch, but I'm going to have to pull out of my book launch. And if you don't mind, use that space and turn it into a platform that's bringing global voices that can speak on how to mobilize for Palestine right now, through listening to Palestinian writers and what have you. And they did that. They did that. They put all of their resources into that. And then still 7 months later, when I was ready to launch it again, because that's when I next had time, they allowed that. So they stood shoulder to shoulder with me. And that I value. You know, I've gotten in legal trouble for activism, and one of my other publishers that I work with a lot will be the ones who will be the first one to send me a message every day I'm in court. You know, and it goes beyond, like, we have a common language, you know, that goes beyond the deal that is being made and the transactional exchange. There's a common language that is meaning that we are actually speaking together. In those instances, you know, it's not about them having ties to the matter, the matter, the paper, you know, it's about us being in a community together who believe in the same things and who are only publishing for the same reasons, because there are certain things you've got to put your thumb on and discuss, you know.
Yeah. Hi.
Yeah, I don't know. Lots of things I value in the process. I mean, the way that each issue is sort of set up, we have an initial series of calls with all of the editors together. So again, each editor is assigned their word, and they're asked to provide 1 or 2 or 3 texts that, you know, informs how they're going to approach this word. And so we have 3 sessions for each editor. So we discuss the text, and they do like not a pitch, but like, you know, sort of sharing what they're thinking. And we basically do this kind of like informal critique sort of session and exchange. So I value that. I think that always ends up being kind of a rich exchange, and there's always somehow suggestions about improving or changing the format of the publication itself. That's also valuable. And just the editing process itself, I find, can be incredibly frustrating, but also incredibly enriching. And sometimes it's a combination of the two, and somehow that's like the sweet spot, you know. It's like a lot of hard work and a lot of frustration, but somehow through that process that you come up with something that I think, you know, neither parties would have, you know, come to without that process.
You mean between the writer and the editor?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
I think Luxx, for me, said it. The common language thing is important, and I mean, as a small publisher, when people reach out with some of their work, it's always because because of how they, you know, because of kind of they relate to how. I mean, I don't want to say how we see the world, but it's basically they are concerned kind of with the same things we seem to be concerned about, like public-facing things. So I think the common language and the, you know, nobody wants to work with shitty people when you're working with literature. When you're trying to say something, you want to feel that you're saying it in a safe environment with people who will understand you. If not, they don't have to necessarily agree or, you know, have the same experience, but people that will treat work with, you know, with respect, which comes like at a very kind of intimate level as well, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree that, you know, there's the whole work of you know, giving and taking always ends up producing something that you didn't expect, and to have that openness of people, whether they're writers or editors, co-editors, to be able to say, okay, we're in this and we're gonna see what can come out of it together. That's, I think, one of the most interesting aspects, because a lot of times a piece doesn't just come to you ready, and if you're really invested in it, you want to work on it, and if the writer's invested and believes in that interaction, they'll work with you, and also editorially, you know, we don't always get along with our co-editors, and we get along, we don't always agree on the same things, and we learn from each other quite a bit as well. And that's very exciting.
I think that's actually a really good point, and it goes to what you were just saying as well, Haig, that this idea of like collaboration in that sense, but also like mentorship as well, and being able to have that exchange of knowledge and not have someone push you in a certain direction with your piece, but develop you,
right.
And everybody be willing to realise that it's a craft and that you're all working to push towards possibility of each other and also then of the entity itself. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a thing. I mean, it's widely known that in the Arab world, there's not a culture of editing, and so and very rarely, because we often publish in English, and now we're publishing more and more in Arabic. That's becoming more of a conversation. Because, I mean, there's only been a few times where I've given comments and the person's like, no, my piece is perfect. And I'm like, okay, so that happens. But I mean, that's rare. And most people are pretty open. But it's also interesting to think about like a cultural shift in terms of like, editing in the Arab world on a wider level, and how it is that we give comments and how we become better writers as well, and what better editors as well. So like you said, I'm of the camp, like I want to enhance someone's writing. I want someone else to help me enhance my writing, but I don't want to like change your writing. If I want to change it, then I probably shouldn't be editing it. Yeah.
I do a lot of, I work with a lot of writers as an editor. And sometimes those relationships are just the most intense and intimate relationships. They can, you go very deep when you edit someone's writing. That was just a thought.
Yeah. Well, I just want to say that I was, although we're all kind of part of the literary world in Beirut, I've actually haven't met Sarah or Haig. I've met Luxx a while back. So I was very happy to meet you all. And it was a very nice conversation that we had before and now. So thank you, everybody, for being here. And I think now we are going to transfer into our Q&A. If you want to still hear us talk.
Every generation is molding, twisting, breaking the way we express ourselves. We, and I quote, are tired. So we ended up replying to each other's using simple reactions or, heart, whatever. How are you adapting to this change? To all of you, including yourself.
Sorry, can you say again what the change is? Sorry.
How are you adapting, or are you prepared to this change? Are you adapting? How are you? No, wait.
No, but what is the change itself?
Yeah, what's the change?
Yeah, exactly. Generational. Boomers, they express themselves differently than millennials, Gen Z.
We're not boomers.
No. I know.
I think you mean with technology, how we've done faster and faster replies.
Exactly.
And we're expressing ourselves in a more rapid way. And
stickers, reactions.
Yeah.
We barely express ourselves using one sentence. Yeah. This is what I'm asking you. Like, are you ready for this change? Are you doing something about it? Just a thought. Thank you.
Go.
I mean, I'm not adapting. I still write really long texts and messages and stuff. So I don't know if I'm not sure if I'm adapting. But there is something. For example, what I've noticed now is there's more and more people use in my generation or in our generation use English to express themselves, or the people, the milieus around me anyway, use English to express themselves in writing, right? And this English isn't, it's not even just that it's a different language than our parents' language or than other languages. A different use of English, not a different language, a totally different use of English. And it's also a different use of English than like English as a second language speakers in English-speaking countries. So like the diaspora in America, for example, their English and their understanding of the English language and their use of the English language is very different than ours here, in very subtle, small ways. But then I don't think it's like a difference that's like a very sharp difference, a very stark difference. I think it bleeds into each other. So I think in generational wise, it can kind of do the same. So it won't be this like huge shock. Slowly, stickers and emojis and stuff are, you know, I don't know, maybe like in 2 generations, people will write in hieroglyphs, or maybe 10 generations, I don't know. People will write in hieroglyphs again, you know. So I think it's kind of exciting also. And yesterday, for example, I did a performance with Shatr, with the collective, where the other members were reading, and I had made a video out of text messages. So it was a poem, out of text messages. And I think it was a poem. It was very short.
Awesome. It was super cool.
It was very short texts. So I didn't use very many long ones. But I don't know if that answers your question. Yeah, Noor.
Yeah, but I wanted to say, I noticed you used a lot of, you did include emojis.
I did.
There was one emoji that was the shocked face that just took over the whole screen.
Yeah.
And for me, as someone that really appreciates writing but gets intimidated to write, I really appreciated that there was talking and writing and emojis.
Well, sometimes emojis say exactly what it is they want, and everyone has an understanding of what certain emojis mean, even though it's not actually clear in the emoji. We all know what an eggplant means, you know, or I don't know.
I don't.
No. You know, or they have meanings that are somehow implied, and somehow suddenly everyone knows what you know. There's the face that's like a melting face. I use that all the time, but I don't even. What does that actually mean? What is it like? But you know, you'll understand me if I send it to you, right? You'll understand the feeling. So yeah.
I love that you picked up on the generational thing in terms of diaspora actually as well, because I think that there is that thing where you end up falling between languages as well, and so you end up in this place of okay, you, me, you. Yeah, okay, I'm doing this fun pronoun thing going on today. I end up falling in this gap between language where illegitimate poetry is created because you missay things, or you say things in an immigrant time warp because your parents left before, right? And so you say things in this immigrant time warp, falling between language, and you actually say something fucking beautiful by mistake because you use language wrong. Yeah. You know, and so what you end up with is these very interesting uses of words. But I also think in terms of the emojis and GIFs and stickers, you know, I think it's genius. So really, when somebody sends a sticker that's just perfect, I'm like, I cannot. I can spend sometimes half an hour looking for the right one, and people are so fast. Wow, and Saint Hoax, you know. These Instagram pages, Saint Hoax, you know, it's one line, and then it's just this GIF or something that says more than an essay on the topic could say. No, this is really clever use of language. It's a really clever use of body language outside of the body, you know, a use of atmosphere, of context. It's a really interesting use of language, actually. I think it's very exciting. I have not caught up with it, actually. I don't know that I will, but I appreciate it from being over 30 years old.
No, I agree. I think it's actually a very complex series of associations that the sender makes and the receiver as well. You know, be it emojis or stickers or... So, you know, on the one hand, I have no issues with this form of communication for the most part. And then for me, it's about sort of, I don't know, managing attention spans always. So, I don't think we should all be prisoners suddenly to like the quickest form of communication necessarily. I think it can be accounted for, integrated. I also am not of the school of like, this thing of like, who does print anymore? Like this kind of thing where like everything is going into this axis and we all fall in line, even though I realize that there's like real kind of concrete factors that make it such, mainly economic and so forth, but nothing kind of really goes away, right? It's like, just because you have laser-guided missiles doesn't mean that knives are no longer dangerous or something. So yeah, I think it's more about kind of increasing what your sort of bag can contain in terms of, again, registers, languages, attention spans. I think it's about incorporating or integrating or processing somehow.
I'm not above emojis. That's it.
I think melty face means lesbian orgasm, by the way.
But just to say that I speak to a lot of young people. I get lost between Generation Z my dad sent a bunch of emojis today. So but I work with a lot of young people, and they don't always speak only in emojis, and I don't know. I don't find it a thing. I have 2 students here. They're both amazing, brilliant. They know how to write, and I don't know. It's just not an issue. Yeah.
Hello. Thank you all for this panel. I have a question for luxx, if I may. And it might be personal, so please feel free not to answer. Sure. So I love what you said about trying to make poetry a bit more like the street itself. Mm-hmm. And I think in doing that, somehow we also have to make poetry a bit more like the body. Mm-hmm. So can you speak more about the ways in which your own body seeps into your poetry, and maybe the ways in which it fails to?
Yeah, sure. Really interesting question, actually, and it makes me think that recently I've been working with a composer in Egypt who excites me a lot, and we're thinking about musical score and poetry and the composition of both those things as somewhat akin. For example, I'm very interested in how we can measure our heartbeats now. People wear these watch things that do stuff like that, right? Yeah. They do. Yeah. Science and stuff is happening, and I'm interested in, like, for example, if I was walking really quick down the street at night because I had to get home because it was dark, and let's be honest, anybody who looks like a woman has a curfew because so we have, I'm walking fast. What if I measured my heartbeat then and wrote somewhat of that instance? And what if that heartbeat made up the grammar of the poem? So like found tempo. Or that's the way that I used punctuation. I think punctuation is super interesting, okay? Like, so how punctuation is used to propel, stop, or speak. So it goes back to the emoji question as well. Like punctuation, once you realize that punctuation doesn't need to be used at all in the way you've been told it's standardized it should be used, you can start using it in really exciting ways based on how it visually speaks to the way that a poem moves, or the body of a poem in that way. And similarly, when it comes to the written text, because I started off in performance poetry, really, that's where I got known more in performance, and then I but also wanted to move my craft into the written word. So I had to think, how can I, on the page, mimic the way people experience my body when I perform. And so I did a lot with, I realized that actually no one told me I have to stay like purely in black font. I know it's going to be black and white because publishing houses are broke, but I don't have to just stay in black. I can gradient that shit. So I can capture the timbre of my voice and the way that my voice moves. I can catch that through the way that I mobilize the white space through different gradients of black to white in the way that I place my text on the page. So it's these kind of things. Does that answer the question? Yeah? Awesome.
I feel like I might say something very not knowledgeable, but isn't that what hip-hop and rap does generally? Like play with tempo, play with acting, play with tempo, timbre, and if you're doing something with a heartbeat, you do it faster, or you do something slower. So I feel like it
and I don't think that rap or hip hop exists outside poetry at all. I think it is the oral poetry that I was almost kind of referencing somehow earlier, actually. But one thing that I'd say that rap does really well, the page fails to do, for example, is it can create a... Sorry, I'm laughing because when I teach this in schools, I usually reference like a really old Eminem song. Which one? I know. I shouldn't say his name ever or conjure him into a room. But two, it shows my age. But he used to actually, with the way that he created the rhythm in some of his beats, because I learned a lot about making sound through listening to hip hop records when I was a kid, you know. And he'd create like the drum beat, so you'd have the drum pad, you'd have the boom, and you'd have the tsh, and it depends how he used his words. So he created percussion. So if you took away the background music and you listen to some of those bars, you listen to some of those verses, you still get the tsh, tsh, because he did it through the way that he used his syllables. So yeah, basically, yeah.
Hello. First of all, thank you, all four of you, for this brilliant panel. My question is to all four of you, actually. It's something that was previously slightly touched upon by Sarah and Professor Rantisi. So, it feels weird to call you
We're not in class.
So obviously this is a cultural examination panel, and a big part of culture is language. So as people who write in English, which English is not your first language, or even if English is your first language, as you come from an immigrant background or from parents who might be immigrants, how do you bridge the gap between what you want to convey and what actually comes out in writing in a language that is either very familiar to you but distant to your own roots, or either not as familiar in the first place?
I have an answer, or a thought. I think there's that like rule of you write what you know, and what you know, if you're writing in English, it's because you are living in a certain way in English. And I think, I mean, even if you're, it's not your I mean, you have a mother tongue. In your case, it's Arabic. In our case, I guess mostly it's Arabic. But first of all, the English that you write, again, definitely sounds very different than the English, and I know you're writing also. And it sounds very different than like an Arab American or an Arab in the UK. It becomes its own language that's kind of infused in your infused with your experience, your like rooted experience. So I don't think you have to. I mean, you should think about it all the time, but I don't. It's not. I find that not writing in your so-called mother tongue or whatever is just because you're not kind of living in your mother tongue, and that's also okay. Our culture isn't this. I mean, this kind of immediate culture isn't an Arabic culture. It's a hybrid, you know. So I think English also has a certain universality for many different reasons. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question. But like, for example, I always think I use this example in my, like, for when an American uses the word like zatar, you know, like they'll italicize it, or whatever. Arab American, they'll like put it in italics, yeah. Or like, I don't know, why don't they just say time or whatever? Why do they say zatar? You know, like just write it as time. Like I would write time. I wouldn't say like zatar, and if I did, it wouldn't be romanticized. I eat zatar every day, you know.
Or the fact that they use Allah instead of God when they have an entire text.
Yeah, I mean, just say. Yeah, I mean, that's because they are distant from their mother tongue or their homelands, or so that sort of is in that the writing shows that. Here, I think your culture, whatever it is, it's obviously not just one culture; it's many cultures. The words are sort of, they carry it, not necessarily the words, but the language and the syntax and whatever will carry that hybrid culture in it. Yeah, those are my thoughts.
I'd actually, because you're talking about familiarity to language, and I wouldn't necessarily say this in terms of prose or essay or perhaps nonfiction. But in poetry, I think it's actually an act of getting less familiar with the language. So for me, the most exciting part of writing poetry is the editing process, because the editing process can go on for, it's the longest I took editing a single poem was 1.5 years, you know, and that was a matter over, you know, I spoke earlier about when the salt leaves your body, you know, when you sweat or you cry with a piece, or with a person, a collaborator. The same can happen with a piece when you start to let it talk back to you, because you turn it over enough so that you start to realise that the poem was saying something that you didn't know, but you have to have become unfamiliar with it enough. So, you know, when we dream, at least, at least one concept of when we dream is the way that we've moved throughout our day. We've collected a bunch of images subconsciously, and our mind starts to lay them on top of each other and somehow creates a narrative, right? Poetry does the same thing, right? So you start to layer these images on top of each other that you've collected somewhat subconsciously as you've moved through life, and together they create a grammar. So they take single entities, like what grammar is, and turn it into a complex meaning. Right? So that's what they do. They layer these things and they create new meaning. And sometimes you have to turn them over to try and understand why this thing connected to this, why these 3 images have somehow come alive in the same poem. You know, why do I have salt and sand and a mountain? How are they speaking to each other? And so you have to become unfamiliar with them. You have to admit to them, I have no idea what you're talking about, you know, for them to then speak back to you. So I think sometimes it's an act of actually moving further away from what you know and logic in that sense, and into the dream language. It becomes a bit, it does become psychological, you know. I think it's a big partnership between psychologists and writers, actually.
Should I answer? I like your question, Eden. I think that, you know, there's a lot of... I wasn't raised here, so I was raised in the U.S., so my first language was Arabic, because my mom was, and my parents were fresh in the U.S. And when I was with my mom all day, so she was always speaking to me in Arabic. So I learned, you know, later. So I think that sometimes that what she gave me of the language and speaking that and hearing that at first. Contributed to how I construct sentences and how I think of things. But then, of course, or think of the world and perceive it. But then, of course, as time went by and education came into play and different contexts, my writing kept changing and my writing voice kept changing. In terms of language, all I had at my disposal was English. But the way that I could use it changed over time so much, even when, and especially when I came here at the age of 28. So, and I've been here for 15 years. And in those 15 years, you know, my writing completely changed, and I was able to find a little bit more kind of what I need it to be. But at each moment, I felt like it was what it was, and I couldn't do more about it besides continue writing. So, you know, I might have been one of those annoying people who use Zatar italicized, you know, and other things. But I don't mind that. Like, it doesn't bother me if somebody does that today either, because I understand that distance that they have from the language, and also the connection they have to those particular images or those particular parts of their culture that they have also at their disposal. Because when you're raised in the U.S. but with Arab parents, you become this thing, you know, and Arabic and the things in your house are very much a part of you, but they're not what you know have outside of that, outside of your home. So as you get older, then you become more nostalgic for those things, and so there's all kinds of I think and you know, we talk about this a lot in terms of language, like which language are we using, and Arabic, you know, is something that we're trying to also push through the journal today as well, because it's important to us and it's important to you know, to produce in Arabic for different reasons. But I think that whatever language you have, you should use it and use it however you can. So that's, you know, I can't I can't get angry with someone because they're publishing in English in the Arab world, but I can see perhaps the gap that there needs to be more Arabic. But I can't use any other language to write. That's it. So that's all I have. But I might be able to sprinkle. And maybe I'll think differently now. Like, I've heard a lot of that criticism about italicizing. We used to do that in the journal, and we don't see it as much anymore. Or maybe it's me. I don't feel the need to italicize as much anymore. But sometimes if something's transliterated, it's a bit confusing if it's in. So there's a matter of clarity and not necessarily a matter of this is this exotic language that we have to italicize. It's sometimes just about readability or practicality's sake. But it's interesting to think about nonetheless. So that's where I am.
Yeah, I mean, I also think it's interesting to think about. I just don't have a kind of thesis or a coherent kind of thought. But yeah, the derivative is bilingual. Everything is either initially in Arabic and gets translated to English or vice versa. And that process is also endlessly fascinating somehow. Even, yeah, it's translation. So it's not, the term is not some alien term. But in fact, when you get into it, it's like, it is kind of alchemical or something, right? It's, the kind of distance between like how between precision and spirit or something like this. And then, Luxx, you said something about psychologists and language, like some kind of intimate sort of entanglement there. And I don't know, years ago, I was in a therapy session, and the therapist was a French person. And when he realized that I spoke French, he encouraged me to switch whenever I wanted to. And his take was that some certain memories are compartmentalized in certain given languages, depending on context. I don't know. I never, sometimes when you start off in a language with somebody, it's very difficult to switch, so it never happened. But I definitely think that my experience is compartmentalized in language. And my access to those languages, I don't know when, why, or how, but definitely varies, and sometimes debilitatingly. Like sometimes I don't have access. Like not today. No English today, or no Arabic today. It's very real. Like it's not some, anyway. And yeah, I think my writing practice, and it's choppy. It's not like I have a kind of sustained practice throughout the years. Like I've been writing, but not consistently. Anything art related that's like academia, so that was English, so it's automatically English. Even in basic conversations, we'd be speaking in Arabic for hours. Suddenly we talk about art or work, it just switches. More recently, I've been thinking about writing in Arabic, but I'm still at a stage where I'll do it in English, knowing that I will translate it later. But then as I'm doing the writing in English, I'm already in a different kind of syntax in my head. And that's an interesting beginning of something for me. Do
you translate it yourself?
Yeah, then I get somebody to go over it, yeah.
Okay. We're done. Yeah? Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you.